Colin Albert, ALBERT.
Said you've never been in a fight before.
Nope.
Yo, your advantage, boys. I will beat all your asses.
You've never been in a fight.
Nope.
Promise you, I will fuck you all up.
You're a bitch, bro. Fuck you.
Yeah, fuck you, you pussy.
Clean cold, boy. You be knocked out. KO. Bang, bang.
Your entire life.
Other than with my brothers, no.
In terms of evidence of a fight, I don't know what Mr. Lau is talking about. He says there's no evidence of a fight in this case. John O'Keefe looks like he had been beaten to death. He's got two black eyes, a laceration over his right eye, a laceration over his nose, a giant wound on the back of his head, and he doesn't look like he was hit by a car. He looks like he was in a physical altercation. It's as plain as the nose on your face, and we have evidence that we have witnesses who are going to propound that evidence, present that evidence.
But tell me how whether he's been in a fight is relevant to an issue in this case. That's what you have to do.
Because the police should have, the Massachusetts State Police should have, if they were doing their due diligence, they should have investigated this young man. They should have investigated every single person that was in that house, in or around the home of where John O'Keefe was found, the Albert home, and they didn't. They did nothing to investigate whether or not there was someone in the house who tended to fight, who wanted to get in physical altercations, who had a propensity to get in physical altercations.
Prosecutors say Reed and O'Keefe arrived in her Lexus SUV at that house in Canton for an after-hours party, but then she left without him. The next morning, O'Keefe's body was found lying in a snowbank near a fire hydrant in the front corner of the yard. Prosecutors say as Reed drove away, she slammed her SUV into O'Keefe, going more than 24 miles an hour, leaving him for dead in a blizzard. Reed's defense insists O'Keefe went inside the house, where he was killed during a fight and a dog attack.
Her car never struck John O'Keefe. She did not cause his death. And that means that somebody else did.
In the house that night was homeowner and Boston cop Brian Albert, his wife Nicole Albert, their son Brian Albert Jr., who was celebrating his birthday that night, their daughter Caitlin Albert, Brian's brother Chris Albert, Colin Albert, who is the son of Chris Albert and nephew of Brian Albert, family friend and ATF agent Brian Higgins, Nicole Albert's sister Jen McCabe and her husband Matt McCabe, as well as two friends of Brian Albert Jr., Julie Nagel and Sarah Levinson.
To answer your question before, you asked, why would they do this? Why would they go after her? And the answer to that is simple. The lead detective in this is State Police Detective Michael Proctor. Michael Proctor hid from the grand jury, as we found out yesterday, that he has been close family friends with the homeowners, the Alberts, for over 2 decades. At his sister's wedding, 8-year-old Colin Albert was the ring bearer. And as it so happens, Colin Albert was inside 34 Fairview Road that night, and he was never questioned by Trooper Proctor. Trooper Proctor never mentioned that this family, that they called Alberts a second family, that he had Julie Albert, Colin Albert's mother, try to babysit for him just 10 days before John O'Keefe was killed. That is how close these people are. So to answer your question about why would they frame her, that Colin Albert and the people inside that house aren't questioned, aren't treated as suspects, and don't go to jail, because somebody has to be responsible for John O'Keefe's death.
Now, just to be clear, you didn't do it.
We know who did it, Steve. We know. And we know who spearheaded this cover-up. You all know.
Yes, we do.
Now, Reed's defense says a very different story. They say that John was actually beaten up in the basement of this house and attacked by the family dog. They claim that he was dragged outside and left in the snow to die.
Albert had led the city's gang unit before commanding the fugitive apprehension team. It was the elite squad responsible for taking down some of the city's most dangerous criminals and featured in the 2013 TNT show Boston's Finest.
1 minute we're walking around, everything's fine, and then 1 minute it's not fine.
You're a combat veteran?
Yes.
How long were you in the Marine Corps?
4 years.
During the course of your Marine and military training, did you have any training in hand-to-hand combat?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
Yes.
In addition to your Marine training on the subject, did you also receive additional training from the police department through the academy or otherwise on basic hand-to-hand combat?
No.
So that's not part of the academy?
Not hand-to-hand combat, no.
Fighting techniques, use of batons, things of that nature?
Defensive tactics.
Defensive tactics. Okay, that's fighting, right?
Well, it's not hand-to-hand combat, no.
Okay, fair enough. I may be using the wrong word. It's physical, it's training on how to either defend yourself or control another person physically.
Yes.
I mean, they're not going to send you out there on the streets completely ill-equipped. They need to know that you know how to defend yourself and how to put somebody in custody that doesn't want to be in custody, correct?
Yes.
And that might include fighting.
It could, yes.
And beyond your Marine training and your police training, you're independently trained in techniques of fighting.
Have I boxed before? Yes.
Okay. And you've trained in boxing. It's not like you just walk up and smack a heavy bag, right?
You'd have to rephrase it.
You've trained. You're a trained boxer. You're a trained fighter.
I've boxed in the past, and I've trained to box, yes.
Yeah.
Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found mortally injured on Brian Albert's front lawn. His body was in full view and almost right below Brian Albert's bedroom window on his front lawn. He was found wearing only one sneaker. You'll learn that Brian Albert was a Boston police officer as well, and that he was a trained first responder. Brian Albert was notified that another police officer was injured and unresponsive on his front lawn, and Brian Albert did nothing. His sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, and other civilians were on his property that morning after John O'Keefe's body was found. Police, EMTs, firefighters, police cruisers, and ambulance, fire truck, lights flashing, and first responder Brian Albert never came out of his house. Equally important for you will be the fact that the lead homicide investigators never went inside the Albert home that night. Your brother Brian Albert is someone who is close to his family, correct?
Yes.
And when I say his family, I'm talking about not just his, wife and children, but also his extended family, correct?
Yes.
You were part of his family, obviously, correct?
Yes.
And your son Colin is part of his family, correct?
Yes.
The Albert family is close, correct?
Yes.
You all essentially grew up in Canton.
Correct.
If someone had a dispute with a member of the Albert family, Brian wouldn't be happy about that, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
You know that Brian would stick up for your kids, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Your son Colin is particularly close to your brother Brian, is he not?
Objection.
I'll let him have that. Do you know?
Yes.
Now, you testified you moved to Maple Street in Canton not long before January 28th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
And before that, you lived at 7 Meadows Ave in Canton?
Correct.
And that was when John O'Keefe was your neighbor, correct?
Correct.
I believe you testified he was a couple of houses away from you?
Yes.
And he was your neighbor for a series of years, was he not?
Yes.
Can you explain for the jury who or what is Nebercracker?
What is Nebercracker?
Yes.
Like the character?
That's what I'm asking.
It's a character in a cartoon Called Monster House.
And would you agree with me that Nevercracker in the movie Monster House was this kind of old curmudgeon who didn't want anybody on his lawn, correct?
The character, yes.
He was the get off my lawn guy, correct?
In the movie, yeah.
What was your nickname and your wife Julie's nickname for John O'Keefe?
Mr. Nevercracker.
All right. And your wife Julie actually had John O'Keefe plugged into his contacts as Nevercracker, correct?
Correct.
In fact, you were there one time when Julie showed Karen Reed, her phone to show how John O'Keefe was plugged in as Nevercracker, correct?
I believe so.
And this whole nickname started because of a conflict that Colin Albert had with John O'Keefe.
Not correct.
John O'Keefe complained to you about things that Colin was doing.
Not correct.
He would tell you that Colin used to throw beer cans or beer bottles in his bushes, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
So you can answer that. What's your answer to that?
That is not correct.
John O'Keefe told you that Colin used to flip him off, correct?
Not correct.
And say F you to him.
Never.
Colin used to cut through his yard.
Nope, that was Dylan.
You knew that John didn't like people cutting through his yard, correct?
No, I don't know that to be true.
You look at those and tell the jury if you recognize what they depict.
I do.
What do those photos depict?
It's me and my wife straddling John's fence. We're giving a thumbs up in one of them and a smile in another one.
Okay. And you say John's fence, so that's actually on John's property, correct?
Part of it is, yeah. I mean, I don't know what the easement is from the street to the fence as ownership goes, but yeah.
All right. Would you agree with me that you texted those photos or somebody texted those photos, whether it was you or your wife, Julie, to John O'Keefe?
Absolutely.
All right. And off of those are fair and accurate representation of photos that you took?
Yeah.
All right. Would you agree with me that those photos give some context to the text that you sent him on January 28th when you were trying to get him to come out and you threatened to, quote, fuck up his lawn if he didn't come out that day?
What do you mean give context to?
Well, in other words, here you are texting him photos of you and your wife on his lawn, correct?
Yes.
And that's a common theme that explains the January 28th text where you were threatening to fuck up his lawn, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
John O'Keefe complained to you about things that Colin was doing.
Not correct.
He would tell you that Colin used to throw beer cans or beer bottles in his bushes. Colin used to cut through his yard. John O'Keefe told you that Colin used to flip him off, correct?
Not correct.
And say F you to him.
Never.
I promise you, I'll fuck you all up.
Clean cold, boy, you be knocked out. KO. Bang, bang.
Pull up, bitch.
If someone had a dispute with a member of the Albert family, Brian wouldn't be happy about that, correct? You know that Brian would stick up for your kids, correct?
Objection.
Both times I met Brian Albert, he seemed like the type of person that you'd be surprised he's out socially because he doesn't seem like he ever wants to be there.
But at the bar, Reed says there was an invitation to continue hanging out at Albert's home. They drive to the Albert's house. What happens next is disputed.
So I pull at the foot of the driveway. It's snowing. John has no coat on. It's windy. So I drop him off. He goes up the driveway and approaches the side door. And as I see him approach the door, I look down at my phone.
Reed says after about 10 minutes of waiting in her car, she became irritated that O'Keefe still hadn't gotten in touch with her. And she drove back to his home where she continued calling him before, she says, she fell asleep around 1:30 in the morning.
I mentioned the basement because that's very likely exactly where John O'Keefe went once he walked into the house. The Apple Health data from John O'Keefe's own phone establishes that once he was at the location at 34 Fairview, he climbed 3 sets of stairs. The Albert house happens to be 3 floors. suggesting that he was climbing stairs and walking about as if he were inside the house and was ushered down to the basement, at which point there was a fight, he was beaten to unconsciousness, and then everybody in the house leaves, not having to go down to the basement. There's a door that services that basement that is closed. No reason for people who are upstairs, either upstairs or on the main floor of the house, to even know that there had been a fight downstairs, or that John O'Keefe never made it out of the house alive or conscious.
I was there to find out who plowed Fairview Road the morning of January 29th, 2022, because they never interviewed the plow driver. And guess what? 2 months later, I found that driver. His name is Brian Lucky Loughran. He plowed Fairview Road at 2:30 in the morning. He went right by the house, and John O'Keefe's body was not on the front lawn. He also told me in an exclusive interview that he saw a Ford Edge parked directly next to where John O'Keefe's body would be discovered 3 hours later. And he had been interviewed by the FBI about that. And why didn't the state police find this guy? Why didn't they track this guy down? Because they didn't want to track him down. Because his information, his testimony proved that John O'Keefe was not killed by Karen Reed at 12:30 because he was not on that lawn at 2:30.
Keep in mind, Your Honor, I don't think it's lost on anybody that Colin Albert was hidden, specifically and intentionally hidden from all of law enforcement for the first several months of this investigation. Nobody was willing to even say he was at the house. That is highly, highly suspicious.
No investigator ever approached you to say, can I have a copy of that screenshot, correct?
Correct.
And in addition to that, you never told an investigator to say, hey, I have a copy of a screenshot of a text message conversation that I had with Colin Albert, correct?
No, it wouldn't have been relevant at that time.
Okay.
I believe, because Colin was not at the house and wasn't introduced as being there until later.
At no point, isn't it true that at no point during that interview did you admit or mention that Colin Albert had been at the house that night?
I don't believe I did, no.
Did you forget that Colin had been there?
No.
Is there a reason that you left his name out?
Because he wasn't there. He left when we got there. He wasn't there for the duration of the time that we had that night.
Except for the fact that you just testified that you never saw him.
Well, he said he was getting picked up, and then he was gone, so I assumed he left.
People say a lot of things, but you didn't see him leave, and you didn't see him in the regular floor of the house, correct?
Right. He was no longer in my house, so he left.
Well, you didn't search the house, did you?
No.
You later were interviewed by Trooper Michael Proctor over at Jen McCabe's house. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Colin's name was never mentioned then either?
No, because Colin wasn't at the house for the duration of the night.
Did you tell Trooper Proctor that Colin Albert was present at your house?
You know, I probably didn't, because anytime I was questioned about who was there, to me it was who was there afterwards, hanging out from like the 12:15 point on. I didn't consider Colin as being there because I literally crossed paths with him. He left, and I didn't consider him being a part of the group that was there.
You never mentioned Colin Albert to Trooper Proctor, correct?
Correct.
And you never mentioned Colin Albert to Sergeant Lang?
Correct.
Mr. Albert, the question that had been posed to you by several officers was, who did you see in your home when you got there, correct?
Objection.
No, I'll allow it.
I don't believe that's how it was asked, no.
But Colin's name was never mentioned, left out.
I testified multiple times that Colin was there when we arrived.
Oh, you did it after the fact, right?
Yes, when I was at...
You knew that the defense knew that Colin was there.
Objection.
Sustained.
In your initial reports to the police, his name was never mentioned, was it?
I did not mention it, no.
And Nicole did not mention it in your presence, did she?
In my presence, no.
If there's no sign of an altercation or fight, how can he turn around and say that a cocktail glass did this? They can't talk out of both sides of their mouth. How could they reasonably ignore two black eyes, a laceration over his right eye, a laceration at his nose? He looked like he had gone 10 rounds with Mike Tyson, as my colleague has once analogized. Of course there's evidence that he was in a fight. The back of his hands, deeply bruised. Those are called defensive wounds. I don't care what their medical examiner called it. Anybody who's seen any sort of a fight, a street fight, knows that the back of the hands, the back of the arms, get the brunt of the punches as you cover your face. Of course there were signs of a fight. Not just a fight, a brutal fight.
We all know that she did not commit a crime, and the tyranny that's going on in Norfolk County, along with the district attorney's office, the Canton Police, the Massachusetts State Police, is it's an injustice, and we are not going to give up until Karen is free and we find the people who killed John O'Keefe.
John never went in the house. It's not a story, it's a fact.
Well, when you said, tell them the guy never went in the house, Brian Albert was on that exchange still, was he not? He was still part of the group text?
Yes, Brian is on the exchange.
And Brian Albert was the one to respond, wasn't he?
Let me switch pages here. 51.
He responded, did he not?
Yes, he did.
And then you would agree with me that he responded with one word, correct?
Yes, he did.
And in response to you saying the guy never went in the house, Brian Albert's response was, exactly, correct?
Yes, that's his response.
We're done here.